You are now listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc, sharing insights through real, honest, and practical ways to improve your communication and relationships. Featuring your hosts, Dr. Pamela Kreiser, Meredith Edwards-Nagel, and Taylor Polindo.
Well, we have a special treat tonight. We have my friend Michelle Thomas, who is joining us today on Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc.
Hello.
So Michelle, I'd like you to meet Meredith and Taylor.
Very nice to meet you both.
Pleasure to meet you.
And Michelle is joining us because of our topic tonight. And Michelle works for a large electric utility company in California. And we thought she would be a great voice to tell us what she's learned working in that sector. So before we jump into that, let's listen in on the content for tonight. Have you ever noticed someone self-sabotaging their own speech? Phrases like, sorry to bother you. This is a little thing. And it's probably nothing, but these are all examples of instances that reduce the power of our speech. When we engage in self-defeating speech like this, we silence our own voices. By definition, to sabotage something is to hinder success. Sabotage is the act of destroying or damaging something deliberately so that it does not work correctly. To self-sabotage is when your actions or thoughts hold you back from accomplishing what you want. O'Barr and Atkins suggest that men and women engage in this practice, but women tend to do it more. Women sometimes will use hedges like, this will only take a few seconds, or it's sort of hot in here. Hedges are used when the speaker doesn't want to commit to a bold claim. Here are some common hedges. I think, probably, apparently. As far as, well, when hedges appear over and over again, they create a break in the flow of conversation. They cast doubt over the message. O'Barr and Atkins also warn us about using super polite forms. You know, like, I'd really appreciate it if you would. Would you please open the door if you don't mind? Both hedges and super polite messages are self-sabotaging. They take the steam out of our messages. They signal doubt to the receiver. And what doubt do they communicate? Maybe my incompetence. Women tend to engage in this kind of speech. But the question is why? Well, some of the answers are likely found in context, especially male-dominated contexts. Scholars have noted that generally women tend to be more risk-averse than men. And in studies specifically examining risk, gender differences are greater when women perceive the risk to be somewhat of a gamble, quote unquote. In contexts that are traditionally considered male-dominated, women may elect to self-sabotage as a way to mitigate risk. In our episode 60, we spoke about women and heart attacks. Did you know that women in their 50s and younger are 7 times more likely to be misdiagnosed during a cardiac event and sent home from emergency rooms than men? Even though cardiovascular disease is the leading cause of mortality for women in the United States and globally. Yet heart attacks have traditionally been seen as a man's disease, even though it's the leading killer of women worldwide. In emergency rooms across the US, women are often told to calm down or told not to panic. Lisa Feldman Barrett identified this problem in older women as well. She says, quote, women over the age of 65 are more likely to die of a heart attack than men. One reason why is that when they show up in the emergency rooms with symptoms, they and their physicians believe they are anxious and that they are experiencing anxiety. So they send women home to have a heart attack and die instead of sending them for tests as they would do for a man. Women self-sabotage in how they speak about their cardiovascular symptoms. Dr. Catherine Kreitz-Sulis has studied women's underuse of the word pain when providing descriptions to emergency room physicians. Kreitz-Sulis found that instead of using the word pain, women will frequently use words like heaviness, fullness, tightness, pressure, or ache. Using these more pleasant terms can confuse the person's evaluating the patient. Here we see a woman might minimize her own symptoms in order to reduce the risk of being seen as dramatic or as an overreactor. Now, like heart attacks have been seen as a man's disease, in job sectors, there are careers that have been traditionally seen as male jobs. In construction, finance, technology, science, transportation, engineering, and energy sectors, to name a few. Even though the percentage of women working in these sectors has been growing, in these traditionally male-dominated contexts, it can be challenging for women who are naturally more risk-averse than men. What's the risk they have to manage? being seen as incompetent, being seen as someone who doesn't belong in the conversation, being someone who is too assertive or too aggressive. This perception of risk encourages women to engage in, quote, double voice discourse, a term coined by Judith Baxter. Double voice discourse is based on the assumption that the person listening is going to have a negative response, which in turn encourages the speaker to qualify their opinions to reduce the potential risk. According to Baxter, women are 4 times more likely than a man to use what she calls out-of-power language. Here's what the double voice discourse sounds like. It's just my opinion. I know I'm not the ultimate expert on this. Correct me if I'm wrong. These are all what she calls out-of-power messages. So all of this research leads us to asking a critical question. What can women do to increase the power of their speech? Is the answer to sound more like a man? Well, of course not. In this episode, we propose 3 actions to take now. 1, restructure your speech. 2, use more commands. And 3, use your pitch and volume to reinforce your message. So let's talk about the first solution. The first solution is to restructure your speech. Baxter says we have to remove this double voice discourse that we have in our messages. We have to revise them. So instead of saying, I think I can do that, change it to, I can do that. Instead of saying, I should do that, change it to, I could do that if I wanted to. Instead of saying, I'm hopeless at, say, I'm learning how to. Instead of saying, I will try, change it to, I will do. Instead of saying, I'm nervous, change it to, I'm excited. The second solution is to start using commands. So instead of saying, can I bother you for a moment, say, tell me when you're available to talk. Instead of saying, can you tell me about X, say, tell me about X. Instead of saying, if you don't mind, describe the issue, say, describe the situation. Instead of saying, I'm wondering if you could explain, say, explain the customer issue. The third solution is to use your pitch and volume to reinforce your message. Stop using ascending pitch and replace it with descending pitch. In other words, don't raise your pitch to make something sound questionable. There are multiple sources that call this uptalk. Uptalk is defined as the result that everything you say sounds like a question, instead of using a descending pitch. Here's the difference. I could say, today is Wednesday. Or I could say, today is Wednesday? Notice the ascending pitch. I could say, John can cook steak. Or I could say, John can cook steak? Notice when I use the ascending pitch, it makes the party wonder whether I'm asking a question or telling someone something. And maybe you've had the situation where you've been wondering that very thing. Is the other party asking me something, or are they telling me something? Another nonverbal strategy is to maintain your volume. If a speaker consistently trails off in their speech, it will sound powerless. When you speak in declining volume at the end of your messages, you risk clarity as well as credibility. For all 3 of these strategies, the key is to remember to practice these changes so that they become true behaviors in your communication toolkit. Practice restructuring your speech. Practice using commands. Practice using pitch and volume to reinforce your message and give it strength. Another key is to practice these changes in what we call low-stake environments. Instead of practicing these changes at the most important business meeting you have this week, practice these when you're driving alone, or driving the carpool full of children, or grab a partner at work and practice these changes. Select low-stake contexts to move these power-increasing strategies into reality. Okay, we have a lot to talk about.
Oh, so I'll tell you my first note on this is, how could I do this to myself on purpose? How's that possible?
It's a great question. What do you think?
Well, I want to say no, but now I am doubting and I'm avoiding using a hedge in the way I express myself right now.
Don't want to hedge your way through the question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the answer now is yes. I think where it sits for me is it's because I have that constant voice in the back of my mind that's trying to manage not belonging where I am, or manage being to this or to whatever, to another party or in a workplace, especially. And so if I'm always having those voices and managing those things, and I guess I thought was subconscious, but intentionally reducing my message.
Well, if you sabotage yourself, you just kind of accept a smaller loss right there.
Yeah.
Oh, that's how I kind of see it. What do you think, Michelle?
I definitely think there's some embedded risk mitigation. I got to say, I mean, I have a ton of male counterparts and they're incredibly gracious. And these are basically self-inflicted barriers that I put up for myself. But a lot of the males that I work with, and still to this day in 2022, I find myself sitting in meetings going, oh, I'm the only woman in the room, or there are only two. Like for every, 4 men, there's one woman.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I found myself doing, kind of throughout my career, maybe less lately, but I am definitely guilty of this, is, well, they're engineers and I don't know, I can't compete. So my self-sabotage would be like, oh, could you just throw me a bone? I have an idea and, I just want to get your thoughts on it. And it's really sort of giving them the opportunity to just say, well, aren't you cute? And, what could you possibly know? But let's just throw her a bone anyway. So it's just really, I mean, it's incredibly discounting. And quite frankly, I have good ideas. I know I have good ideas. Yeah. But I sort of just kind of sneak it in to, hey, what do you think? It's sort of a litmus test to see how far I can go with, what my ideas or what I want to discuss.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So I just had a crazy thought when you were talking. So is it possible that we've evolved in a lot of these traditionally male dominated contexts and that we're the ones holding ourselves back from the rest of the change that we were expecting or hoping for?
Sadly, that's what I'm hearing right now.
No, because that's kind of something I don't think a lot of women think about. I think they think, oh, the numbers aren't where they need to be, or I need it to be X, Y, and Z. And it's like, wait, you're not helping it evolve.
I absolutely agree with that. Because like I said, I work with some incredible people, and the males that I work with, really, for the most part, I mean, I think there are always people that, have a sort of a sense of superiority, maybe deserved, maybe not deserved. But overall, I would say that the men that I work with are incredibly inclusive, want my ideas. Maybe it's my generation. I also have this weird sense
our generation.
Okay, you're right. You and me. I have this weird deference to our executive leadership. Again, inclusive people, and they're males and females alike, incredibly, gifted. But I do that in that situation too, which is really the worst place you can do that, because they're looking to you to make decisions and be confident in those decisions. But I do tend to tap dance out my, whatever it is I'm trying to say. And
you just use 5 times more words than you needed.
Yeah. Right. Always. Honestly, well, you know me. Hello.
It's true.
Yeah.
I know women too, though. It's pretty typical. Yeah.
Way extra. And it's actually coaching that I get from my direct leadership. Just answer the question.
When you say it's when someone doesn't want to commit to their message, is that part of that? I've never thought about it like that. I've thought oh, I want to commit to my message. I'm just trying to reduce any problems. I'm trying to manage all of that. It's not about not committing to my message. So what is that?
Oh, I think it is. I think if you're trying to mitigate risk and commit to a message, I don't know that you can do both. You have to pick which lane you're going to be in. I don't know that you can do your job while also committing to messages and also mitigating risk at the same time. I think you end up with too complicated of a puzzle. One of those things will go away.
And that's that super polite speech that you're talking about too. Because then
have you ever done that?
Well, when I was listening, I was like, well, that's not true. I want to commit. And then you get into, then there's this super polite speech. I'm like, well, there's nothing wrong with that. I think this whole thing, I'm trying to fight you back this time. I'm not used to that. And each time I have a thought of well, this is okay, then you're.
But if you're going to fight me back, you have to be super polite about it.
Yeah. Please, would you please listen? I noticed in the workplace, I'm really I've done that a lot. I would really appreciate if you don't mind helping me with this thing. I don't want to take over your time, but all
right.
those.
So this is our usual where you're trying to talk us out of some of the ideas in the podcast curriculum.
Is that what I do?
I think you do that occasionally, but here's the thing. If you're already predisposed to being very polite or using hedges or using, these double speak kind of messages, I'm not worried about you being nice. So I don't think the answer is, we need to work on being nice or polite. You already are that way. Okay. We're talking about the other area that needs to be improved, where it's like, how do you come across more direct, more confident, more committed to your message, and less compromising and less responding to the risk and more responding to the person?
Yeah.
So I have a question though, because now I'm maybe I'm on Meredith's side, because one of the things that I'm
whoa, Taylor, I got you.
No, the reason I ask is there are also times where that overly polite speak is almost like you're greasing the skids a little bit. Let's make this conversation easier. And I hate to say that perhaps it's manipulative, but it's really just trying to create a friendlier environment so that you can potentially get more out of the conversation, or you can get out of it what you want.
You get more bees with honey.
Yeah.
Okay. So let's differentiate that. That's not what I'm talking about, because you're talking about using it strategically.
Okay.
I love that. This is accidental. This is, I just do this because I haven't cleaned up my speech. I just do this because I'm in a communication environment that I perceive as risky. But I think as a strategy, love it. Okay. Anything strategic, I love. This is more about those messages where we just automatically do this because we're kind of freaking out or perceive risk or don't think we're the person that should be at the table, maybe doubt ourselves, whatever.
That's where I'm seeing this play out too, more in me. Maybe don't know enough about this. I'm not the expert in this field, right? You were talking about that with engineers. I want to soften the blow before because I don't want to get into some discourse or uncomfortable conversation. I'm trying to prevent that. But I'm seeing that by concentrating so much on that other thing that could potentially not even be happening with the other party. It's just wasting my time and lessening the power in what I have to say.
My issue with this is that
everyone has got an issue with this. I like it.
No, here's the
colleagues.
Thing. We've talked about this. I have a hard time making like a declarative, literally can't even get it out in this moment. I have a hard time making declarative statements. And so I don't want to make a statement I could learn later is not 100% true. I always have to put the hedge in, maybe that, I'm learning this, those kinds of things. Yeah. And I'm always undercutting my message. And I realize listening to my husband and I speak, when we'll listen to the same podcast and then we go to retell it, I will defer to him because I'm like, he'll just say it as if it is true. And I put in all these questions and I'm just not great at retelling it anyways. But I don't know. I just have such a hard time with saying something as a matter of fact, because as I'm getting older, I want to always be learning and open to other perceptions or someone else's version of something. And maybe that doesn't quite apply when it comes to work and it's just kind of black and white.
I think we're trying to make, because I think if I'm going there in my head with you, Taylor, we're trying to make that.
If you're plagiarizing her brain again.
I'm doing it. Yeah. We're trying to make this wonderful thing that we want to do for other people work, but really confusing a listener with that type of speech, or then they focus on that you're trying to reduce some random risk. It's making me want to stop and think before I speak. I should be doing that, but sometimes, I'm human. And also realizing that I'm in my mind creating a problem before I even know there is one, and that's such a waste of time.
It sounds like a lot of this focus is on the message sent, not the message received.
Because I think potentially I could help the message received.
I hear a number of you, a number of my friends tonight. I hear some of you saying, but it's good here, good there, for the source. That's the person speaking. If we think the message received matters, which I do have some opinions about that. If you go to episode 1, you'll hear my thoughts on the message received is the one that counts. If you think about that and think about this topic, we're confusing people.
Yeah.
Because the message received is, I know, but I don't know. I'm asking, but I'm telling.
Yeah.
So this is where I want to wrestle with Judith Baxter.
Okay.
And I'm wondering, Michelle, if you have examples of this in the workplace too that you could share, this double voice thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's the example we talked about. I'm not an expert. Correct me if I'm wrong. All those things.
Michelle, do you have some friends that do that?
I don't personally do it, but I certainly have friends that do it. I do it often. Again, I sit in meetings, we're brainstorming, we're strategizing, and I read some article or I saw some study results, and I will say things like, I didn't read it from, beginning to end. And in my mind, I think I'm just being transparent. You know what I mean?
Yes.
I'm being transparent. I just want them to know I'm not the expert, but you should really consider this. So I think it's really intent, and then it's both intent and how you want the message to land.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. How do I do that?
I relate with that visual so much of just like the clashing of hands. Like, how can I do this?
So Michelle just joined Taylor's team.
Yeah.
I'm the rover. I'm on everybody's team. I just want you to know that. I'm the utility player.
Okay. I like
a
that.
Good team player. I see this.
If we think about it from the message received perspective, I think that tells us we have some work we have to do. I also would argue if we don't have the flexibility to understand how those tools work, we won't use them in real interaction, which we talk about a lot if you don't practice it.
Practice.
Yeah. I thought that was the sad reality of this is we really will never do it if we do not practice it. It won't.
The sad, desperate reality.
I wrote that down. This is a sad reality if I don't tell my toddler exactly what I want. If we don't practice it, which I love the low stakes because I am going to practice it with my toddler, so maybe it will translate to adult life too. But if we don't practice it, it'll never happen. Which, because we know, we've heard a lot of this stuff, like a lot of this has come out in other episodes.
Mm-hmm. Let's practice commands.
Okay.
So I just want to give you a little background on commands. So this is something that I have to use a lot in mediation. I have to use a lot of commands. And it's done for a couple of reasons. So one is it's very direct and it also moves the interaction in a structured way. And I'm doing that on purpose as a mediator. There's another reason I use commands, and that is to have higher levels of control in the interaction. So when you're in the middle of somebody else's conflict and you're trying to mediate them, if you are presenting yourself as weak in any way, they will walk all over you. But you don't want to train people to yell at everyone. Just yell at everybody and then they'll all be under control. So you have to figure out other ways to increase your control. One of the ways is to use commands. So I think we should practice.
I'm excited about this one.
Okay. All right.
I love this a lot. And I know that you're really more talking about in the workplace, but all I could picture was my 3-year-old and me saying,
commands.
I need you to do this.
That's your workplace.
Instead of yelling. Like, the yelling doesn't work. I know that.
That is something I talk with a lot of women about. I've trained communicators for decades, right? And a lot of the women that I work with say, I want to be more assertive, but I don't want to yell at everybody. And I don't want to be bitchy, and I don't want to be, that person that's like a kind of a monster. What do? Well, you have to think through what are the dials in front of me and what can I adjust on the different dials that will increase my control without increasing my volume.
Yes.
We can do that a number of ways. Commands is one of the ways.
Because I think what you said just a minute ago was just kind of hit me. I've thought about that a lot. But when I was younger, I got a lot of time. You're bossy, or you're too loud, or why are you so angry? Right. So I think if you're someone that thinks like I'm always trying to regulate, that I'm not the angry person, or I'm not, like whatever that voice is, unless you have a real problem, deal with it. But that's not what we're talking about right now. So probably maybe I'm hearing that maybe
Oh my God.
I'm doing it again.
It's like you twisted your ankle for a second.
So I caught myself though. Hey, we're getting there. So I'm hearing that learning these commands we're going to get into right now will be helpful for not escalating volume just to try to be powerful, but to know you have the power and just do it in a way that's maybe a little more healthy.
I mean, it's the same thing with the ascending and descending pitch, which we'll talk about in a minute.
Okay.
So Michelle, you're going to be on the committee with me, and we're going to have them each answer, and we're going to pick the winner.
Oh no.
It's a quiz.
Oh my
Oh
god.
my
First
goodness.
quiz I've done with a guest.
Wow.
I know.
Win. Michelle. I
Okay, you
always
ready?
win.
No, there's no, don't ask for her Venmo.
No, I didn't. I said I always win. I didn't ask for her Venmo.
Wow.
Now I see how she's winning. Okay.
Oh my gosh.
But
Okay, here's the prompt. Ready?
Gotcha.
Can you give me a moment at some point today?
Can you give me a moment at some point today?
Mhm.
Like to talk to someone?
please let me know when you're available to talk.
So you're using a command.
Just let me know when you're available to talk.
I need to talk to you today.
Not a
I
command.
win. I win.
Not a good.
What
That's
do you
not a
think,
command.
Michelle?
Oh,
So did you drop the please or did you still say please, Meredith?
I changed it to let me know when you're available to talk today.
that's not a command.
Yeah, it is.
Let
It
me
is.
know. It's
Let
not a
me know.
question. I heard
Do
the
s-
question.
let me
at the
know.
I'm
end.
instructing you to do something. It's a
Yeah.
It
command.
was a. All right.
You could have a stronger, like, tell me. You could do that. Michelle, so when Meredith and Taylor were in school, it would be like Meredith's about to turn in her test and she erases the please really quick before putting it in the stack.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's what I was going to say. I think it's a tie, to be honest. I
Okay.
was going to give it a tie on that one.
Okay, so that means nobody gets a point.
Sorry.
It's okay.
If it's not too much trouble, help me understand.
Oh my gosh. It sounds like something I would say. So depressing.
It's got a few problems.
When you have time, help me understand.
Can you just say, "Help me understand XYZ"?
You help me understand is better than the one Meredith gave, I think. What do you think, Michelle?
I would agree. I was thinking, I need for you to explain this to me
Or
Ooh.
just explain this to me.
or explain this to me. Yes. Say Taylor on that one. Sorry, Meredith.
Okay. All right.
It's okay.
If you can get comfortable with language that begins with these directives, like these commands, they come off more naturally in your regular conversation. Our kids will come in and they'll say, you won't believe what happened to me. And I'll say, tell me. Like, I find that it's very common in my regular language because I use commands so much.
Hmm.
But see how short that is. And I'm not yelling it. I'm just being very clear. All right, you ready? This is really fun.
Okay. All right. Says who?
I'm thinking about the problem and wondering if you could possibly give me more information if it's not too much trouble.
Oof.
I need more information about the problem. The customer service in me wants to avoid that word problem. We're not allowed to use that word.
Okay, but do a command.
I need you to tell me more about the problem.
Yeah. I don't know if that's very commanding. Here it is again. I'm thinking about the problem and wondering if you could possibly give me more information if it's not too much trouble. You know how much fun that was to write.
I know. There's a lot that I just want to cut out of it. Less words, less. So I'm trying to cut so many things off of that sentence. So I'd say, tell me more about the problem. I need more information, in the reverse of what you just said, Taylor.
If you reorder my sentence structure, will you get the
So
point?
just tell me more about it. I need more information.
Yeah, I like the need after the tell. What do you think, Michelle?
Okay.
I like that one too. I really do. It's two
Okay.
parts, but you start strong with the
I like that.
Tell me about it.
All right. Nobody's a winner. We still have to work.
Great.
Meredith, do you still want my Venmo though? I'm kidding. Just asking for a friend.
Just asking for a friend named Michelle. Oh man, these are the 3 things that you recommend for how to increase your power. And this, we just talked about the second one, which is using more commands.
Yeah, we did.
The other 2 are restructuring our speech. So removing that double voice that Miss Baxter calls it. So changing that. This one, a lot of that stuck with me. It's instead of the I think I can do that, just I can. One that really I never thought of, because we talk a lot of in this podcast about don't let people should on you or should on yourself or I should this, that, whatever, is I never thought, well, what's the opposite of that? What's the other way to do it? And it's, well, I could if I wanted to.
Yeah.
It sounds so silly and so funny, but I think I do shoulding in my head a lot. And now I'm going to go, I could do that if I wanted to. I could do that if I wanted to. I don't know. And then there's a third one.
Oh, Well, I was just thinking, well, I feel like I've had, when I say like I need something, I've had people come back and say like, I don't want to be told what to do. And I feel like that's not telling someone to do when you are requesting like a need you have. But
I'd
that's
say
kind
just
of
get rid of them.
the pushback I've had to
Unless
this.
it's Meredith, then it's awkward.
No,
we'll
it's
keep
not
her.
me.
We'll keep her.
Is it possible because you're becoming more assertive, people are pushing back on that in your life now? And
Yes, definitely.
you don't have the time to do a lot of this confusing talk anymore. So you are getting better at it and you're noticing it because you're getting pushback on it.
Okay. Maybe there's growth there.
Okay, so I want to ask Michelle about commands. What are your thoughts since you work in a male-dominated context or previously male-dominated? I don't know how much it is in every interaction. What do you think about using commands? Do you use them?
Interestingly, in person, I tend not to. In writing, I tend to more. It could be saving time. Usually when I'm doing a chat or a text or an email, I tend to just be going quickly. So, and then I go back and then to your point, I go back and I read it. I'm like, God, I was kind of rude, and I've even followed up in an email and said, and just tried to soften it by putting something else into it. But a lot of times it's based on time. And that's why I'm a little bit briefer.
Interesting.
Or more brief.
Have you had pushback on the email or do you get more done through that kind of communication?
That's a great question. I would say likely more productive when I'm more commanding and less flowery.
So maybe it works.
So we don't say like, let me know. We say, email me back by Friday.
Ooh.
Well, no, I mean, just
Yeah.
being clear. Remember, clarity is kind.
Yes.
We've talked about Brene Brown's little phrase there.
That's really all this is, right? Is we're not being kind communicators when we do all of these hedges and double talk and all the. So we're being
Well, I think there's a perception that the speaker is protecting him or herself. Because when I hear people using hedges and saying, I think it wouldn't be too much trouble and all these different things, I think, do they even have that clarity on what they're even talking about right now? It makes me doubt that. So let's talk about another thing that cast doubt, which is the pitch.
Yes.
I don't have a stat on this, but I would say I see it much higher incidences of this in women than men, much higher.
Oh, I just think of my job in customer service, and that's the way I get everything done. It has to sound very kind, almost like I'm singing at you.
Yeah.
So I think it has its application. You're talking about customer service. I worked in restaurants and I was a bartender when I was in college. And there is a level of sincerity that you're trying to convey. And depending on where you are with customer service, people are expecting to be treated maybe a little bit differently. What I've noticed is I typically don't use the ascending tone unless I'm challenging somebody. I've noticed that when I challenge somebody, that's when I use an ascending tone. Because I'm a pretty loud talker, as you're probably all finding out now. When I challenge somebody, that's when I tend to go, but is it really that? And I'm not trying to be disparaging or condescending. I just think I'm like, I don't want to hurt your feelings, but I'm going to challenge you.
So, but that again is a strategic application. I'm not talking about strategic applications. I'm talking about sounding like that most of the time. Having the tone go up.
But I'm saying I don't do it on purpose. I do it because I'm hedging. Maybe I'm wrong and I want to make you feel comfortable when I challenge you. I'm saying that I'm doing it for the wrong reasons. I'm not doing it strategically.
She's tattling on herself.
I'm owning this.
Yeah. Okay.
But I think that is information for all of us. If somebody says back to you, are you telling me this or are you asking? You have totally confused the listener. And we've probably all had that response before.
One time when I was early dating Ralph, I told him I was going out for drinks and he thought it was a question. And then he responded with like, okay, yeah, you can. And I ran out of the bar and I called him and I was like, hey, I wasn't asking you. And he's like, okay, yeah, I thought that was so weird why you would ask me if you could go have a drink. And so I'm noticing maybe I do that more. And I intend to.
Yeah.
It actually is the one that I found frustrating. And I heard women in the workplace do this before. And I was just like, can you just say what you mean? Because it's this very sweet sounding thing. I'm not saying, Michelle, that when you do it, it sounds like that, but sometimes it just sounds too sweet. And I'm not here for that. I'm trying to get stuff done. I'm working right now. Tell me what you need. It is confusing. In my last job, you would go together for certain meetings with certain clients. And a lot of times some of the women go, I'm going tomorrow. Are you asking me to go with you to meet with that client? I don't know what you need. So
that's a good example. I like that.
Sometimes I could hear the pitch raise. I've only ever heard women do it. I don't think I've actually ever heard a man do it.
I have.
You have?
When I'm training mediators to be more assertive, I see them all the same, and they do different things that need to be dialed in. And this is one of those additional things besides using commands or lowering the tone, sounding more committed to the message, including not trailing off. But I've definitely had men do this. It's not as common though.
Yeah, that trailing off. Can you talk more about that? What is that? Just like,
well, you've had it before where you're saying something and then you just kind of go, oh, well,
okay, maybe I do that.
I think you did it this weekend when I saw you.
Great.
That's why I got so inspired. I would guess you wouldn't struggle with that, Michelle. What do you think?
Surprisingly, as I'm listening to this, I think I do. But I don't know if it's tied to this, and I don't want to go down a rabbit hole. I do think I do that. However, I think it's because I start to verbal vomit. I over-explain, which we talked about with the dance of visibility, is over-explaining. And then I realize it, and then I just start to trail off like, I'm just going to stop now, and it just.
Yeah.
So. Yeah. So that combination with over-explaining is a rough one. So that by definition, these are sentences that lose volume and become inaudible. So they just kind of go away. It's almost like over and then way under doing it. Instead of going directly to the middle.
It's complete. It's a total rub. I mean, it's just a rub. Like, don't over explain if you're going to trail off and not finish what your thought is, it just doesn't make sense.
I like that explanation. It's just a rub.
It is.
So I used to do this when I first played competitive tennis. I used to overrun the ball, then I'd have to back up, then I'd hit it. And you can do that if you're athletic, so that's great. It's super inefficient. The coaches said to me, or you could just glide up to the ball. Instead, you're racing to the ball. You're too close. Now you have to back up. And it's sort of like that with over-explain, and then just trail it off because...
I actually have an example of that. I was in a meeting and I was having to present something to one of our executives, and I started to over-explain, and I caught myself. I didn't necessarily trail off, but I just ramped it down really fast. And then I said, does that make sense to you? And he looked at me and he goes, no, it really doesn't. I'm like, oh my gosh.
Is that part of this too? Because my mother has called me out on that when I go, you know what I mean? And I'm thinking it's this nice thing, but one time she was like, you say that too much. Just, I'll tell you if I don't know what you mean.
Is it you asking for affirmation?
I want to know. The risk of being incompetent or belonging is just like so triggering to me in this. I'll think to myself, don't hedge or don't do that. Just say what you mean, right? I'll have that thought, but then I'll end it with this, like, know what I mean? Or like, I just want to make sure I make sense. Am I making sense to you? Am I being clear? But I'm doing it after. No.
That's a dangerous ask if you know you kind of botched it up already.
It was dangerous.
Or I think I said it well, but I just want to make sure, like, I want to give them the chance to make sure that they got it.
And get validation for it too, in a way.
Yes.
I mean, in a way, you want that validation. Yeah. But I stepped into my own trap. I should not have said, does that make sense? Because it didn't. And I confused him.
You should have just said, I have to go.
Yeah. I was going to just trail off and like just close my computer.
Okay. So we're going to practice. But what do you do in the middle if you find yourself like you've already messed up? How do we get the words back in our mouth?
You can't get them back in. What do you think, Taylor?
I would think stop and then just say what you mean. I'm sorry. What I meant to say was,
I'm sorry.
Well, because you were just so confusing with all this over talking and hedges and these tones. Your pitch was confused.
Don't throw in an I'm sorry. You've already done enough damage.
How do you just stop yourself?
I
Let me
mean, we
start over.
naturally do it. You'll hear people go blah, 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 blah. And then they'll go, what I really mean is,
Okay.
and I edit this podcast so I can say that I do have some hard data on this from one or more people.
Oh no. Oh,
Wait, what?
I'm just saying, I edit, so I know that all three of us do this.
can you
Because
just
I
call
edit.
us out right now? You know who does
No,
this
all
worse.
three of us do it. I do it too.
Really?
We start a sentence one way, start it another way, and then we say the actual sentence. And then what I do is cut off the first two random legs.
That's funny.
So, in other words, make you seem a little
Thanks. She makes us look
more
good.
polished, right?
So can I ask you, Michelle, in your work environment, how do you receive this when you hear it around you? Because you said there's like sometimes you'll see one woman to every 4 men, and albeit you preface the men are gracious where you work, but do you notice this with other women around you?
Do I notice
This type of speech?
less that and more when they're not doing that? My former boss, before she was my boss, I always thought, wow, gosh, she seems kind of harsh. Turns out to be one of the best bosses I've ever had. I mean, she's direct. She doesn't mess around. She doesn't use too many words, and she's very clear. And when she pushes back, she's direct about it. So I'm more notice that. And in a way, I'm like, I want to be more like that. But then I'm like, well, what if I offend somebody? So it's a great question. I tend not to notice the things we're talking about not to do. I notice more when I admire women that are doing it the right way.
Interesting. Yeah.
Was that boss perceived as kind of a bitch, or kind of, what did you say when you first described her?
She's very direct. She seemed very intense and hardcore. I had never really worked with her. I just crossed paths with her occasionally. I just would leave meetings thinking, wow, that wasn't very nice. And really, she wasn't being nice or not nice. She was just being direct. I learned so much from her. She's the type of person that just would always raise your game. And she's still one of my closest friends. I have lunch with her every month. She's amazing.
But that's kind of the fear as to why we do all this, right? Is because we're afraid of these perceptions.
Yeah.
Yep.
Interesting.
It's like you're admired for not being that way. It gives me the feeling sometimes of you're damned if you do, damned if you don't, kind of thing.
Yeah.
But the goal is to be clearer. That's what is the tension that I feel when I'm concentrating so much on this like potential fear that I'm having, really is what it is, of being a certain way or not being smart enough or whatever it is. Then I'm missing out on just a really great conversation that could just be about the subject rather than about this the fear in my head, you know?
Yeah, exactly. If we hear ourselves doing this speech, if we hear ourselves engaging in these kinds of non-direct patterns or powerless speech, one of the things that I would argue is that if it bothers you, it's worth changing because you're listening to yourself. So I know sometimes I'll talk on these topics and women will say to me, that's totally me. I do that, all that. I do, correct me if I'm wrong. I do, all the things. And what I would say is you're in every conversation. You travel, but you're exposing yourselves to pretty high levels of it potentially. And I wonder about that over time, if that's a good idea to keep exposing ourselves to that powerless speech. That might be a reason to do it just by itself.
Yeah. Some of this to me feels like I'm trying to control something that I just cannot control. I need to let that go. Okay. If I talk to a supervisor, I'm like, I'm trying to control that, I'm working hard. How can I control that thing? I can't I have to do it.
I just really like what you said, because I leave a lot of conversations with shame and guilt and then ruminate. I should have said, I shouldn't have said. And I'm the one that's in all those conversations. So if I'm bothered, I should change it.
I think so.
Yeah.
I know that's easier said than done. So let's just go really quickly through low stake environments, just to remind ourselves. If you want to get any tool into your communicative life, you have to practice it in real interaction. You can do it in low stake environments with a child or with some place that doesn't have the high stakes, like the promotion you're going for is not the time to do that, right? At work. Pick a low stakes environment and start to implement it. The other thing I was thinking, and I want to get your feedback on this, Michelle, What about grabbing a partner at work and practicing some of this speech? Would that be seen as pedestrian in your workplace? Because I wonder about
Not
women
at all.
helping women.
Yeah, not at all. In fact, we do role playing things like that, but it's typically mock interviews. I think it's essential. I think it's an essential job skill for men and women. But in particular, obviously in our lean in group, I think it would be a great tool. I think it would really be helpful.
Because I think if you had two people that were both trying to work on the same thing, you could partner up and say, let's practice talking like this.
I think it's a great suggestion.
And I have a final thought, which is, what if we took stock of our speech, practiced in low stake environments, and became clearer? Now we maybe have already mitigated lots of risk. So now when we face that same communicative context, we might say, I don't see it as much risk as I used to see it as, because I practiced. Because I think it feeds into more risk if you don't practice.
So I was just going to say, so practicing is going to reduce the risk also.
I think so, because then it sounds normal.
Yeah, because I could see how if I don't practice, I can sound like a straight up robot.
Well, I feel like I have
seriously.
The best gift I have is that I teach communication. And because of that, I have to practice all the time with my students. So years and years and years of practice. And I feel like that's a real gift that my career has for me. But one I think we could all give ourselves, which is I'll practice because I'm important. My communication skills are important enough to practice. And because of that practice, then I'll be able to go forward with confidence.
Or alternatively, I could put a little earpiece in and you could tell me what to say.
I mean,
we
Michelle,
are friends.
We are. It's true.
Michelle, she knows what we need. Why have an elevator pitch when you have a TalkDoc?
Right. Seriously. I brag about you all the time. Why don't you just help a friend out?
I'll tell you.
Just asking for a friend.
Exactly.
That's right.
Thanks,
All right.
Michelle.
Before we go, shout out to Bill, who's a fan of the podcast.
Huge
We
fan.
just heard this.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Huge. He was sending the podcast out. We're in Nebraska doing something just different for his work. And he's met total strangers today. And he's like, no, seriously, here it is. And I'm going to just send you the link. And he's like, give him the stats. And I'm like, oh, I think I have the stats right. Seriously, he is such an ambassador. He loves it.
Oh my gosh.
So I had to give him a
My
shout out
favorite
on
right
this.
now is,
I love it.
yeah.
With that said, thank you for being here.
Thanks for
Thank you so
having me.
much.
I'm so happy.
Thanks
to
for being here and
Yeah.
sharing with us.
Well,
All right. Thanks for being here. Once again, thank you for joining us today. Please remember to rate, share, and subscribe to our podcast. And thank you for listening to Asking for a Friend.
let us know what you thought of the episode. Our email is hello@afafpodcast.com. This show is for educational purposes only and is copyrighted. Written permission must be granted before syndication or rebroadcasting. Thanks for listening to Asking for a Friend with TalkDoc.